Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senvis, Engine, Grain SA, and John Deere.
Hello and welcome to Nation in Conversation, broadcasting from Nampo Harvest Day in Bothaville. I am Bruce Whitfield, and we've got guests in studio. We've got a live studio audience. You can make yourselves known, studio audience. People must know that you're here. Applause, please. Applause. Thank you. Live studio audience. We wouldn't lie to you. Right next to me, Francois Strydom is with Senvis. Next to him, Pierre Venter from the Banking Association of South Africa. The Banking Association represents the interests of South Africa's big banks. Next is John Purchase. He's from AgBiz. And Mpumelelo is also with us. Mpumelelo Mkabela. He is from Ntambose Consult. So welcome to our panelists this morning. It's this afternoon. It is this afternoon here at Nampo in Bothaville. Mpumelelo, I'm going to start with you. Yeah. Land restitution. That's what we're talking about today, and particularly at a time of deep political conflict in South Africa, where 24 years into our democracy, we haven't seen the economic liberation that many people hoped would accompany political liberation, and the land issue is being put front and center of what is troubling South Africa today. From a political perspective, you're doing your PhD in political science right now. Give us a perspective, please.
Well, you have to look at it from a political, historical, economic, cultural point of view. Historical, in a sense that we all know our history is a history of dispossession. From 1652 up to 1994, it's been a painful history of oppression of the majority of people. At the heart of that oppression has been land dispossession. And the secondary elements were exploitation, labor exploitation, and other systems that followed from that. But with the dispossession of the land came the cultural aspect, the sentimental attachment to the land and everything that flows from that. And of course, the deprivation of capital, land as capital, not as land for settlement purposes. So you have a whole range of historical factors that necessitates the kind of discussion we're having today. So what was supposed to have happened from 1994 up to now? You remember that at the early stages, the government had a target that by 2014, 30% of land should have been distributed to the previously dispossessed or disadvantaged. We all know the government failed on its target. We also know that even the little that the government managed to distribute to the previously dispossessed to address all of these factors that I'm talking about, very little of it has been put to good use. So you will now have a situation where income inequalities are so rife in this country that people are now looking for solutions to the problem. And as a result of which, you find all kinds of radical proposals. Some people are saying expropriate without compensation. Other people are saying, well, the Constitution doesn't allow it. But constitutional experts say, yes, we can do it provided you comply with the other clause in the Constitution. It says you can expropriate for public purpose or for a public interest purpose, as in for land reform, but you have to comply with the other aspect, which is compensate equitably. So we're having all of these debates right now, and as a result of the fact that we couldn't succeed in the last 23 years to do what the government set out to do. So it's a policy failure on the part of government. It's also now resulting into all kinds of unnecessary radical calls from the left of the political spectrum. And then you have unemployment, low economic growth, which is now festering this tension in society. So, but my view is that we should always try and go back to what got us into the election in 1994, the negotiations that have happened. That spirit of conversations among different sectors, even different, in fact, warring factions in society, to come back to that and some kind of a codessa of sort. It doesn't have to be in the same format, but it can be in different formats where we sit around the table, discuss what can we do to get the country to move forward.
I just want to clarify something you said that's really important. Land as capital, not for settlement. I mean, that's quite a punchy statement to make, because I mean, I have a view that not everybody in South Africa necessarily wants to become a farmer, but because of the political dispossession you talk about over the last 350 years, people want access to capital in order to have some choices about their economic future and the economic future of their families. Just clarify for me what you mean by that phrase, land as capital, not for settlement.
I'll put it simple. If the government builds you an RDP house, it's pure settlement. It's not capital. You don't even own the RDP house. You don't even own the land on which the RDP house is built, because the government doesn't give you title. So you can't even go to the bank and raise a loan out of that few square meters where the land is located. So for as long as you can't raise capital out of it, it means you don't have a capital base.
Yeah.
So that's pure settlement.
Okay.
So what we're talking about for agricultural purposes, for broader land reform purposes, goes beyond settlement. We're talking about land as capital, as a means of production.
Okay. Francois Stroden, let's go to you from Senves. I mean, how nervous are you? How nervous are your members about this, the politics of land right now?
Look, I think, Bruce, it does affect them, but as all good businessmen in every sector of the food value chain, they stick to their guns. And I think it's now, you know, I agree with Mpumelelo's last statement. You can use an issue as a divider or as a unifier. Look, the history that we have, it's a known fact. So,
I mean, Mpumelelo makes the point that there's been a policy failure on behalf of government. So government, therefore, is under huge pressure to rectify the policy, and it could do so alone, or it could do so in collaboration and in cooperation with the agricultural sector. Are those channels of communication open, and are they functioning as well as they should be?
I think, like in every sector, the businessmen are open to new things, to new policies, to new ways of improving their business. So you will find a businessman who will listen to the logic of the idea. Let's take land and...
You're talking about logic, but land isn't necessarily all about logic. There's a huge amount of pent-up frustration and emotion and raw anger, which defies any kind of logic that you might want to bring into the conversation.
Yes.
And that's the great divide right now in terms of land, isn't it?
I'll make the statement that politically, the political animals would want that divide, because that's the environment in which they thrive. They want to blow this political divide, because that's how their business model works like that. So I'm a businessman. I can only stick to that. I must follow that route, and that's where I want to let's build the argument. Let's work around that fact.
That's where you want to build the argument, and I accept that that's where you want to build the argument, but you're not in charge of the argument. The argument is on the streets. The argument is in poor townships. The argument is amongst far more people than you can muster together to have a logical discussion about the future of land. The argument is one of life and death, and the perception of the value that is tied up in the land.
Yes, but let me tell you about life and death. So, and if the maize price, like last year, is at 5,000 rand. That's life and death.
Yeah.
So when the food prices go out the window, that's life and death. When we get the business sector to focus around those ideas, around the ideas of the multiplying effect of agriculture in the economy, that's how we fix it. It might not be the argument in the streets, but that's the solution.
It may be. John Purchase, I mean, you represent the agricultural business value chain, if you like. I mean, yes, you can talk businesses until you're blue in the face. But if you've got, I don't know, how many unemployed people are there in South Africa, 16 or 17 million, social grants are paid every month to about 10 million people, that's an awful lot of social pressure. And a very easy cauldron in an environment, as Mpumelelo so clearly spells out, of one of rising unemployment, rising economic dissatisfaction, the sense of dispossession, very easy political touch points that can be relied upon to take 10 million people, approximately, give or take, and say, you've had a raw deal. I mean, how nervous are you guys at Agbiz?
Yes, we are very involved in the debate with the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, with the Minister and senior officials continuously, since the release of the Green Paper in 2011 through the NAREC process and subsequently through various work streams that we have with them. And I think the problem with land reform is that the government hasn't delivered on its policies and promises to the electorate. And that's why we're in such a crunch situation at the moment. Now, we recognize that. We recognize that land reform must take place. There is a skewed ownership pattern. It's how it takes place and what your end goals are. And you've got to balance the rights of the population to economic inclusivity, in other words, also to the right to property ownership, with your economic situation, and then also with food security. So it's a balancing game that you've got to play to redress the past, but in the process, not damage your economy, maintain the land market, and ensure that we have food security in this country. If we don't get that balancing act right, then you're in a zero game to the bottom.
Absolutely.
And that's in essence what this debate has got to be about. I think Judge Albie Sachs wrote a seminal piece about a week ago exactly on this issue. And he said, but the Constitution provides a framework for what he termed radical land reform without going outside of the Constitution. If you want to go expropriation without compensation, without a doubt, you will have to change the Constitution fairly distinctly, especially Clause 25. So,
what is Clause 25?
Clause 25 is the clause, and it's quite a long clause with good guidelines around property, not just farmland property or fixed property, also all property. And it deals with how property must be dealt with in the Constitution. But it just gives you a framework. And that framework, I think government has not interpreted correctly and has not been put in place the right policies and plans to implement. I think part of the problem is also is an implementation problem. We've spent billions and billions of rand on land restitution and reform and don't show enough for it. I think that is part of the problem that we have.
Mpumelelo made the point that we've seen land reform attempts and we've seen quite clumsy implementation of land reform where farmers have said, well, there's your land, there's a tractor, here's some seed. Good luck, and off government goes to the next project, and very often these farmers have been set up almost to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, is that your observation?
Yes. Well, the minister a while back, a couple of years ago, said that 90% of the farms that had been restituted were non-functional, where land had been given back to the original owners. And many of the farms, both through restitution, where the land has been given back where they haven't taken money, but also through PLUS, the proactive land acquisition strategy, which is their redistribution policy. Many of those farms are also not functional or being farmed optimally. And that is because the skills are not necessarily there, the support measures are not necessarily there. So there are other deficiencies in those processes that we need to look at. That's why we've come up with BASA. We've got a program that we call the Agbiz BASA model, and to speed up land reform. We're trying to speed up land reform, where we said that we will put in private capital for land reform on a 50-50 basis, basically with government, where the farm owner goes into a joint venture either with his workers or with a BE partner into a JV, buys a piece of land, or it can be on that same of his land that he then just puts into this JV, and you get financing, also part financing or part funding from government.
There's some really nice examples of that, and I want to talk about one of those in just a moment, with which you'll be familiar. Let's give a turn to Pierre Venter from the Banking Association. I mean, you guys, your members must be particularly concerned because it's not the farmers of Bothaville and beyond that really do own the land. Your members own the land. I mean, at least half the land, probably. Farmers have got, 145 billion rand in debt or thereabouts to organizations like Centralves or Senves, I beg your pardon. I'm going back 20 years, Senves, and to your member banks. Pierre Venter from the Banking Association, you guys in the banking sector are nervous because you've got a big stake in the farming sector, indirectly. You lend farmers money. There's 145 billion rands worth of farming debt owed to financial institutions. How nervous are you?
We're concerned. I think if there was a collapse, expropriation without compensation, the banks would be able to ride through it. We have sufficient capital. Our banks are well capitalized, and about 48 billion rands worth of exposure directly linked to property. We'd be able to ride through it. It would create a crisis, but I think the secondary impact on SA Inc. is far more serious, because your financial system is interlinked, and what you will see is the collapse of our stock exchange, the downgrade in South Africa, and ultimately it would lead to food insecurity.
What does a poor person living in a shack in an informal settlement who's never had a job and they're 45 years old give a damn about that? It makes absolutely no difference to their livelihood, they feel, and Francois is going to slap me very soon. Until food prices double, they don't see the consequence.
No, they don't, Bruce. And I think
and they've got nothing to lose at this particular point of the debate.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what Francois was suggesting just now, that there really needs to be an informed position in South Africa, and I think an informed position is created through dialogue. And we've been promoting for some years the need for transformation in the agricultural sector. We've created that finance model that John was talking about a minute ago. But I think more importantly, Bruce, if you look last year, the Finance and Fiscal Commission, they produced a report, and that the chapter that deals on agriculture actually highlights the failure of our land reform in our country. And there's an urgent need for us to now pick it up through dialogue and actually do a deal, which is what Mpumelelo was talking about a minute or two ago, where we actually take agriculture forward. Our sector is sitting with very high levels of uncertainty at the moment.
Mpumelelo, all these guys are talking a good talk. Is it going to wash?
Well, I think we have to start from the position that we're all agreed about the constitutional requirements, that there has to be transformation in the ownership patterns in the country. And I think from what John is saying, there's clearly an agreement, there's commitment on the side of the current owners of the land to work with new emerging farmers, but the government also must get its policies right. I think at the heart of this thing, beyond all these pontifications about principles and things like that, the bottom line is that we have to get the skills revolution in this country running, so that even with policy failures, where the government, for whatever reason, fails to implement some of its projects, but we've got a skills revolution where we've got people that are skilled in what they want to do. And then you have to have a pocket of many South Africans who can actually do stuff outside government assistance. So that they can come. I mean, the other day I read a story about Ngebulana, the guy who owns Rebosis, the property company. He said, I started my company from the scratch, no assistance from anybody. There's a new BE charter that's now the government is talking about. He says, well, maybe it will come, property charter, maybe it will come, but it will find me already up there. So if we have a good skills revolution, it can mitigate against failures on the part of government. Sometimes government is not willing, it's not about failing necessarily. It's about bureaucracy, it's about contesting policy positions with other parties and other sectors. So things can get slow. But if we have got a skills revolution in agriculture across the whole value chain, from the financing part, from project management, extension officers, I'm told we don't have proper, enough extension officers in this country. And, agricultural scientists across the whole value chain. You train young black people who are interested in farming. We can break the legacy of dispossession, because dispossession came with dispossession of skill, unfortunately.
Somebody sent a message into my radio show last night saying, when you have your panel discussion tomorrow, which is today, please ask your panelists about transformation in agricultural colleges. I mean, there's an agricultural college in Potch, there's Sadara, which is the famous one in KZN, there must be others. How many of the young people in agricultural college today are black? Any clue? Anybody in the audience know? Anybody know? Majority. Yeah. Okay. So we're seeing there's a pipeline of talent coming through agricultural colleges. Where are they going? What's happening to them?
So certainly the formal business sector pick up a lot of them.
But they're not going into farming.
Well, some of them are going into farming, but this is not purely about farming. This is about the whole value chain.
Sure.
Because it doesn't help. We have a very good farming sector, but the whole value chain isn't functional. So we're really talking across the competitive landscape of value production. And I see them coming through. But the point is the big and the forward-looking businessmen are drawing that into them. They're the guys that's employing the masses, that's creating jobs. Look, I think there's a misconception about government's role. Government was never meant to be an implementer. It has to set the scene. Business has to implement.
Has business done everything it needs to do in the last 23, 24 years?
No, I don't think so. No, you can always say, there's gaps. But certainly, they are where they are, and they're world competitive for doing more things right than wrong.
Sure. What could business have done more effectively in the last 24 years that they could ramp up in the next 5 to actually see a tangible difference in transformation in agriculture?
Look, I think one of the good points that was made at the media launch last night is better integration at local level. So I think we still are too divided at local level. We don't know each other well enough. Businessmen doesn't work well enough. Farmers adjacent to each other doesn't work well enough. So typically this platform, to take that down to local level and foster the debate and find solutions, because this is really what South Africa is about. We've had enough of talking and of shouting. We have to implement and get successes on the ground. So I think those are typically things that we can and should do.
I mean, there's some really interesting projects. I think, John, you alluded to some of these projects. Solms Delta, for example, is a wine farm near Franschhoek. And the Solms family, 7 generations of owners on the land. The current Solms owner of the land is an academic at UCT, inherited the property and decided he wanted to transform the agricultural business, went and lived on the land. And about a year into living on the land, he kind of went, I don't want to give this away. And he felt a bit guilty about the fact that he didn't want to give it away. But he got into a conversation with his neighbor, the Astors. The Astors, big American money. They farm next door to Solms Delta. And together they bought a 3rd farm, a neighboring farm that was on the market. They put that into a trust. The trust then incorporated labor from the Astor property and from the Solms Delta property. And that was the starting point of a business now which has got the farm workers with 100% of the JV, of the former JV, taking stakes now in the Astor business and the Solms business as well. I mean, it's that kind of creativity, John, that is so desperately needed. The question is, it works at a wine farm. Could it work in broader agriculture?
Absolutely. Pierre will know that we're working with various proposals. Well, some are wine, some are dairy, some are grain, to roll out that principle much further. And our model is also not. It's quite dynamic. It's flexible. It gives you a lot of room to maneuver, to position it. So there's no one sort of size fits all. You've got to look at the industry. You've got to look at size and scale and everything to ensure that you have a viable project that you're going to do. So it can work across practically all industries that I'm aware, as long as it's scalable and a fair size. Scale of economy does play a role to commercialize it properly.
You guys don't give away money easily. Would you fund those sort of projects?
Absolutely. As John was suggesting just now, that we entered into a partnership, which we have. The money that we lend would be on a commercially viable basis. What you really need is you need sufficient subsidy coming in from government to make a bankable deal. You don't want to pour too much in, otherwise it becomes a giveaway. You put in just enough to make it commercially viable, and then there needs to be blood, sweat and tears where the guys work from dawn to sunset.
Good old-fashioned farming.
Good old-fashioned farming. And what you really need is you need the actual farmer who's got a proven credit track record as well as a farming track record to actually be on hook. that venture must succeed, failing which he goes down the tubes. And there you've got a recipe for success. I can tell you our members have already indicated that we have a pipeline of about 30 deals totaling about 300 million rand waiting for some form of a partnership with the Department of Rural Development.
No, okay, so is it Department of Rural Development or Department of Agriculture?
It's rural development.
Is there a bottleneck there? Is there a problem?
There is.
What is the problem?
This initiative of ours goes back to December 2015, and we're still waiting. We've got a couple of pilot projects which they would like to do first that are waiting for formal approval within the department, and then the other 30 odd would follow after that.
But so, I mean, the plans are all there.
Yes.
There's money available, I'm assuming, in the Department of Rural Development.
Well, I'm not sure the money is as much as everybody believes
Okay.
it is. I think their budgets are strapped. They have earmarked money for our particular finance model, but we are waiting to get it approved at this stage.
Now, the organisers of this event are going to be a bit cross with me, but I'm going to break with the format just a little bit because I spied in the audience somebody who's doing something very interesting in the Eastern Cape, and she knows I'm going to pick on her. Gloria Serobe is in studio. She's the chief executive of Whitfield. Let's going to get a microphone to you, Gloria, because I'd like you to tell everybody, please, about the project that you're running in the Eastern Cape. At least your PR machine has told me that you're running a very successful agricultural project in the Eastern Cape. You're looking surprised?
I think before I come to that, I want to stress maybe a point that was stressed here, that our constitution is very strong. It was deliberately made strong on property rights. There was a deliberation around that, and that has not changed. And the second point is that, and on our property rights, the world all over, out of 138 countries, we are rated top 20 in terms of how strong our property rights are. So I think let's just park that. The second one is that our judicial independence has been rated very high. I think it's number 16 in a world of 138 countries. We need to recognize that, that in the chaos, we've got those institutions that are protective. Here's a point, though, that the constitution was made strong on the ownership, but there was hope that the industries will have honest conversations. And that is the part, I think the industries, all of them, not just this one, must go back to the table and talk about what are these honest conversations that did not happen. Land reform is said to be a failure, and we always talk about government. The point of the matter is that it's a whole agriculture system that is a failure. I'm in the rural areas. It is not correct that, for example, the seed suppliers will take their most hopeless seeds to these programs, knowing that they will only give 1 ton per hectare, and therefore the product is a failure. That's devious. Quite frankly, let's get to that. So is the fertilizer companies. And so is these mentors. These mentors are up to no good, to be honest. We must get to this mentorship system. It's very devious. And because there's government money in the process, and this government is floating all over the place, it's not getting to this reform program. So I think the industry must be honest to itself.
I'll pick a fight with them on your behalf in just a moment. I'm really keen to hear about your very innovative
I'll come back
project.
to that. Then come back to our situation, because we're in the rural areas. And this is where then my biggest criticism of government comes in, and fight for government as well, Bruce. This lack of security of tenure for communal land in the rural areas is horrible. But we are there, we are making it work, because we're working with these owners of this communal land and to make it commercial. And they have arable land producing up to 8 tons per hectare. But the history of South Africa has actually taken them out of the system. And nobody wants to go there. The country average is 4 tons per hectare. That communal land is 6 to 8 tons per hectare. That is with no irrigation. All I'm saying is that we're perpetuating our history, and the industry is not going there Of course, the main thing is that that land has no security of tenure and therefore no investor.
But how are you? You're risking capital. You are prepared to put capital into agriculture in these areas which are being neglected by practically everybody. Tell me about the joint venture partnership that you've got in there where farmers get a proportion, you get a portion, and then you share the upside in really good years.
You've got to take them seriously. They own the land, whether they have security of tenure or not. And so pay them the rent like you would pay the rent in Botharsville or in Whitfield, and the correct rent. Do that. They cannot sit there and wait for 10 years before the profit lines are showing. Put them as a cost item. They own the land, pay them. That's number one. Two, make them as your partners, and they must share in the profits as you would everywhere else. But this is after your working capital has been taken back. Teach them that too.
Yeah.
That if you have put in 10 million rands into the land, it must come back if you want to work on it next year. But if there's 5 million rands profit, they must know that too, and let them share in that kind of profit share. In the end, Bruce, we are backed, as we polled, by Nedbank and Old Mutual. They have the same risk parameters as any other financier. We have made it work for them because we polled has actually stood between them and this community. We're taking more risk, but to their most pleasant surprise, it has worked so perfectly. So it can be done. This education we're talking about, it's just education on real things. Teach them how to deal with debt. Teach them how to bring capital back. Teach them what it means to make loss. But teach them also that they own land and they must expect rent. That's the basic thing that I think all industries are not doing well because there's an abuse which is unspoken of.
Let me talk about those abuses now. Gloria, thanks very much for the story, very much indeed. Would we be having this conversation if it weren't for the rhetoric, Mpumelelo, around land? If it weren't for the president saying we need to amend the constitution, if it weren't for pressure from the far left of politics saying we need to amend the constitution in order to get land without restitution, business needs to do more. And we've seen the admission come from Francois that business hasn't done as much as it could in the last 23 years or so. Business hasn't had the honest conversations as Gloria Serobe would like to have them. We need the pressure of the threat of land claims without restitution in order to make progress. Isn't that tragic?
Well, it's unfortunate that people have to be threatened that their properties will be expropriated for progress to happen. I don't know whether that's what actually makes the discussion worth the while, but I think if we go back to the Constitution itself, there are certain obligations that, as a nation, we have to fulfill. One of them is the whole transformation agenda, which at the center of it is the economic part of it, including land. In my other things that I do, I'm studying the life of Arthur Chaskalson, the former Chief Justice. And I've picked up a lot of speeches where he spoke about land reform, where he emphasized, long before there was a threat, long before there was a red beret in Parliament, long before the ANC became a black party, where he speaks about the importance of land reform and the fact that it's provided for in the Constitution. In addition to the other justice that we've just mentioned now, I think Hang Mosenega also mentioned it some time ago to say, but we've never had a test case in the Constitutional Court where we can hear a matter where land had been expropriated and there was a constitutional dispute. So that is yet to be tested by the court. And the people that have been speaking about it, they've been speaking long before there were these threats of expropriation. I think, in my opinion, what is driving these threats is not so much the lack of land necessarily per se, because we've already said that land has been given, although not sufficient enough, but even the little that has been given is not working. It's lying fallow. What is actually driving all of these things is the extent of the poverty in the country, the inequalities, the rising unemployment. And politicians, in the face of all the promises that they make during elections, they are beginning to think, what must I do now? We all know.
Make bigger promises.
Yeah, but we also know what happened in Zimbabwe when Zimbabwe was so indebted that its budget deficit was beginning to shoot up. Mugabe was becoming unpopular. And then he remembered, oh, I've got Lancaster Agreement. Let me go get it out of the shelf. Then he pulled it out. Then he started waving it to the British to say, but you said you were going to pay for the land. If you're not paying, I'm taking it by force. But it came at a time when his popularity was in decline.
Yeah.
Public finances were not in order. Economy
Hold
was
on
going
a second,
down.
I'm seeing some parallels here. Okay.
Yes.
Which is precisely why it's so blimmin' dangerous. I
So
mean,
we have to
yeah.
sort out the economy issue. The economy must grow in a shared manner, not grow and only empower a few.
Sure.
Everybody must share in the basket. And then we need to fulfill our constitutional mandate, all of us. Where government fails, and Bruce, this is another tragedy in this country, by the way. The elite people who are sitting here, they all think that the poor are the only ones who are always dependent on the government. They want social grants and all of that. But let's be honest. They too are also dependent on the government for what is called policy certainty.
Yep.
Outside the policy, what are they doing? Where is the initiative? Where is the innovation? To say, we know as business people, outside government lecturing us, what needs to be done. Are we doing it?
Are you, Francois?
Yes, I think that's the point we're trying to make, is that there's a combination of, on the one hand, if we talk about specifically this issue, food security, because you need a stable environment to, just two simple facts. More than 55% of South Africans are dependent on the Vaal Dam. So when that overflows, it's fairly significant. When the maize price drops under 2,500 rand a ton, 30 million of our population are fed by either staple or poultry at affordable level. And then you can face the political uncertainty or the velocity that's currently happening. But if you try and do that, effect that, without the business initiative, then there will be chaos. So it is a balancing act.
No, but I think you're dodging the question very elegantly, and that is, what are you doing outside of the realms of policy uncertainty? What are you doing as business to actually say, government is not coming to the party on this. Government isn't creating a certain environment, so we are going to push forward with a reform agenda that is independent of government. We're going to do the right thing because it's a question of sustainability outside of policy machinations and actually get the upper hand when it comes to this, so that when people start waving a finger at you, say, this is what we are doing, not we're waiting for policy certainty.
In business, it's also that balancing act. You need that flow of income that sustains the business, and then the developing wave that comes through. You start developing the new clients of tomorrow. So business realizes this very pertinently, and that's why they are involved in most of these issues. It's not government that's driving it. It's big business that's driving it. All the big projects in every sector, the developing projects comes from big business.
What's the best one? Give me an example of what business is doing outside of the realms of the government mandate.
Okay, if I can talk about our business. So near Randfontein, there's a few clients that we shepherding on a daily basis to learn, to teach them how to farm. To take their hand and take them through the production system, facilitate the inputs, facilitate the market access. We'll have some of them on Thursday's panel, and they'll vouch for that.
Are we talking about 100,000 people? No, we're not. I mean, and that's the scale that we need, though, isn't it? We need the scale of the tens and hundreds of thousands in order to make a real impact. It's noble and good that you're doing what you're doing, but we don't have the scale.
Let's be realistic. How many farmers are there in a normal population?
Well, we know that in 1994 there were something like 130,000 farmers in South Africa. Today there are 37,000 farmers.
That's the point. So there's less than 1% of the population who's farmers. So yes, we can do in that space, we can do what we do. So the IT industry and every industry has to do that to facilitate the economy. But the real people wanting to farm, less than 1% of the population. That's the fact.
That's because it's hard.
Well, it's not such an easy knife, and it's a very specific industry.
The cars suggest it's quite a lekker life, but I think you guys own the cars as well. Is it a dumb idea, Pierre, to suggest that we go a long way down the route? And Maggie Thatcher, the one thing Maggie Thatcher did get right was give the citizens of the United Kingdom something to lose. She allowed people to buy council properties when she became Prime Minister of Great Britain in the 1970s, and gave people a stake in the economy, a real stake. They had something to lose, made them more conservative, and she was the longest running Prime Minister, certainly in living memory. If we simply handed over title of properties that people live in, whether they be those RDP houses or whether we go to the trust lands, whether we go to these properties, we say people get title to that land. Sure. And then you have an asset. You can't trade it for the first 5 years of getting title. You have to build up some equity in that particular asset. But surely that would go a long way to releasing a little bit of steam out of the pressure cooker.
It would. Bruce, if you look at RDP houses, it's estimated that there's something between 1.2 and 1.3 million households that have been given homes where they don't have title. So they don't own an asset. They're unable to leverage by borrowing from that asset. They're unable to create wealth. And exactly the same situation sits in the communal areas where there are no assets. So those farmers are actually set up to fail because they get given a property, they don't get given the wherewithal in terms of skills, and or an asset that they can actually use to actually leverage through.
How complicated a process would it be to do that kind of land reform, John?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty easy progress. If you look at Free Market Foundation, Leon Louw's program on KLM, they negotiated with government to get transfer of title deed, and they started in Paris, very close by here. I think it's 1,200 rand a title deed to transfer. 1,200 rand for a transfer of a title deed is small change in terms of the value that you're going to get by transferring property rights to people that should get them. So I think it's easy. The ANC in certain municipalities started it too. I know it's a very controversial issue in the ANC, but in Pretoria...
Why is it controversial? I mean, why is something so simple and so logical controversial?
You must understand the debate on land too. Is if you look at the green paper on land reform, there are just three principles. The first one is deracializing the rural environment, which is nobody can argue with. It's absolutely imperative. The next two are problematic. It says allocation of land according to race, gender, etc. Now, if the government talking allocation of land, that means they want to own the land so that they can allocate it. There's no other way to define that. And the third one is they say discipline production. You can't discipline production. You can only create an environment in which investors risk their capital to produce.
And then you go on your knees and hope it rains.
Yeah. So if you look at the principle, the ideological principles in those last two principles, it's totally counter to an open competitive society in which property rights are mainstream. And people don't understand that is the thought process or the ideology that they want to do. And that's why the pronouncement that came from Minister Nkwinti in Parliament in the SONA debate, he said it's restitution without compensation, not expropriation without compensation. Restitution without compensation, implying expropriation will follow. And it will be pre-colonial, pre-1652. Government can't then say who owned the land at that stage, so it will vest in government. Then they can allocate it to the people that they want to
But government is already a substantial landowner. Yes. Correct. Yes. I mean, Rolf Meyer makes the point, and I don't know his numbers exactly. Did he talk about that in the panel discussion at the opening last night?
That's one of the issues. Yes. The land register doesn't facilitate race. So we know who owns the land, but who's behind Trust ABC, we don't know.
So and how complicated a process is that?
Look, I think it can be done, but it should be done correctly.
You get a couple of hundred good auditors and give them something worthwhile to do.
That's the process. You need to verify it, and it must be accurate.
I think it is a little bit more complex, Bruce, for the simple reason that if you go back to the apartheid days, in 1975 we put through a piece of legislation where we created the homelands and so on. But they didn't zone that land as agricultural land. So if you go into our deeds registry, the registry is silent on who actually owns it. So you don't know if it's owned by government, if it's agricultural land, or what it is. We actually need to fix up our deeds registry classification system as far as that particular element of our land is concerned.
I mean, the deeds office sort of anecdotally isn't in the greatest shape it could be. I think
I think we've got a world-class deeds registry system. I think we've tampered with some of our coding within it, which has created the problems that we have today. What you really need is a land audit to actually work out exactly who owns what the racial grouping is, gender grouping, and so on.
In the meantime, land is a political football. And for all of the logic and the sense and the good value conversation that we're having, speaking in the echo chamber of this room and online, and I'm sure everyone who's watching it is appreciating the discussion. The trouble is, it is a political football. Political opportunists are going to leap upon every gap that is created simply to get votes at the ballot box come 2019, come 2024 and 2029 and beyond. So we've got 10 minutes in which each one of you has got 2 minutes to give me a solution as to how you would like to see it play out. And Mpumelelo, I'm going to come to you last. To give you some time to think about it, because you're the political analyst here. You need to work out the politics of this. Francois, I'm going to go with you first. From a Senvest perspective, given a magic wand to solve the land issue, how would you best like to see it work out?
So I would stick to my guns as a businessman. I believe that facilitates change in the most positive and in the biggest way. Do your job. If you look up every few seconds to listen to politicians and to this volatility, it distracts you from doing your business. Point one. The second thing, it doesn't facilitate the process. And this is the one thing that both the statesmen we had since 1652 incidentally said. Jan Smuts and Nelson Mandela said, business, or the business of the day, ordinary citizens will take us forward, not politicians. Politicians has another view, has another role to play, if they play it correctly, to facilitate the environment. So what my advice is, stick to your business, do the best you can, and that will facilitate the process. It is a natural process to grow your business, to include more people that is currently included, to include the whole population. If you go to rural towns, that really works and facilitates.
I came through for Viljoenskroon this morning just as a little case study. Yeah. It's not working.
Yeah, sure. Local government is,
yeah, that's a disaster zone.
But look deeper than that. Look at Bultfontein, where the farmers go into the townships, clean it up, provide jobs. That's small wins, and it's businessmen driving those positions. So that would be my solution. There's not a magic one.
Community involvement.
Do your job
at a local level.
At local level.
Very good. Okay, Piafenta, from a banking association perspective, your magic wand?
The banking sector provides finance. So what we need is an enabled environment. I think there's need for dialogue. We created a transformational charter with the financial sector charter back in 2004. And over 10 years, we've seen wondrous movement in transformation within the banking sector. Not enough, we can go further, but we've achieved a hell of a lot. I think you can do the same in agriculture. I think the land issue is not going to go away.
No.
I think it's need for public-private partnership where we sit around a table. We put the money where our mouth is, as we did with our finance model, where we aligned it to the NDP and said it will result in 20% of an extra 20% of land being transferred to black beneficiaries. We would be prepared to do that if we had a joint plan. The sector had certainty, and we could move forward in line with that plan and measure and target ourselves against that plan. So I think there's need for high-level dialogue. I think there's a need for people to give on both sides. Otherwise, we're going to end up in tears.
Oh, yeah. And that's the real risk. John Purchase?
Yes, I think, firstly, we must say that land reform in South Africa over the past 20 years has not been successful, or has not been nearly as successful as it should have been.
Which means it's been a failure. Let's call a spade a failure.
Yeah, and we need an honest assessment of what went wrong in terms of policies and implementation, and not just from government side, also from business side. So I think, yes, you can look from it from private sector side, but you must also look at it from government side. And within the department, I mean, there are so many disciplinary hearings and disciplinary process at top level where there is hardly any capacity at the moment. So we must understand that playing the blame game the whole time, and apportioning blame is going to be difficult. What we need is key role players to get together and have that conversation of where do we take it forward. The first thing we must decide is...
needs to play a stronger role.
Yes,
take a lead role.
Exactly. And what we also need to decide in, are we going to go the route of property rights or not? And this is still a fundamental question which, to my mind, has not been sorted out in the ruling party.
But it is so simple. It's theoretically simple.
Yes.
Ideologically complicated, theoretically simple.
I know, but we've got to participate in that process, even if it's complex. And we do. As far as possible, we do. And we are already set up meetings in line to talk to the ANC on specifically on the policy conference and on their document and on the positions that will come into it. But we have to participate fully in that process.
What sort of response are you getting? I mean, you say we want to go to the ANC policy conference and participate on land. Do they say you must be kidding? We're okay, thank you, or are they welcoming you in?
No. We will have pre-conference talks. In other words, and we've been invited to talk to them. It was the same with the previous policy conference. We had 2 meetings in Lutuli House with them. And
did you see anything that you contributed there translate into actual policy discussion? Okay, so you're not wasting your time.
You win some, you lose some. It's part of the advocacy game and it's part of the engagement game. But you must be at the table and you must talk about these things. Francois will know, at our last council meeting, I strongly drove the whole issue of transformation in agriculture, not just land reform, but also the issue of broad-based black economic empowerment, participating in that. But also there we have problems from government. Our new Agri-B sector code, more than a year, nearly 15 months now, that we signed off on it. It's still not promulgated. It's not gazetted. And why do we get these delays? When people want to position them in terms of models, in terms of projects, etc., to implement these. So you know.
Look, I can't remember how long it took the FICA bill to get signed into law, but I mean, Pierre will assess the fact that their policy making is a long, arduous, and painful process. Mpumelelo, last word to you for this part of the program.
Well, I think that all the different sectors have an important role to play. Government needs to...
You're sounding like a politician, not like a political scientist. To cut to the chase.
You know, the government has to relook at the way it does, policy formulation, right? The business people want policy certainty, right? It has to be sorted. Property rights, how you get, land redistributed, that mechanism needs to be clarified as soon as possible so we can take out all the political hot air and deal with the real issue. On the other hand, business people, where government fails, they have an obligation to lead. I'll just make a very simplistic example. We know that when apartheid became unprofitable, it was hitting business people in the pockets. What did they do? They ran to Dakar, they ran to London to speak to the ANC to initiate the discussions. That's how the negotiations started. Business people took a lead because the system was beginning to be unprofitable for them. They don't have to wait for the moment where we have a crisis in South Africa, or where we've got food shortages because the politicians decided to expropriate the land without compensation. And the stock market crashed, the banks collapsed because they are indebted, the landowners are indebted via the banks. So we don't have to wait for that crisis. We can imagine it. And then out of that imagination, begin to take steps to avoid the crisis. So business people where government is not working can take a lead. But I want to end more controversial. During the apartheid era, black people were not allowed to own land in urban areas or even start businesses in urban areas because it was part of the grand scheme of apartheid, right? You had to do your stuff in the homelands. So the government didn't want black people to do that. Post-94, the government doesn't trust black people. It can't give them title deeds. So they were damned then, and now they're in a different way now, where the government is speaking about transformation and transferring property rights to black people and all of that. It doesn't give them title deeds. The government wants to babysit people because there's a big fear. I don't know whether it's real or perceived, that if you give black people the title of the land to which they've just been resettled, they might sell the land and go away. Or if it's an RDP house, they'll sell the RDP house and go and queue again for another one. So I think that the government must move away from this thing of not trusting black people, that black people are not going to own up to what they've been given as part of the redress policy. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that needs to happen there. Transformation is an imperative. It must happen. But conversations must happen to say, how do we move forward without undermining each other? We have to, black people must be given their sense of agency back to them that the apartheid government deprived them. They must feel they have it. They must feel they can take control of their lives. And if they make mistakes, they may lose out and they can learn out of it. But that's really empowerment for me.
Mpumelelo, thank you very much. And to our panel, thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much for joining us. Remember to follow us on Twitter. You can visit the website nationinconversation.co.za. That wraps up this part of the conversation here live from Nampo, from the Harvest Festival here at Nampo. It's been a very, very fiery conversation. It's been a very worthwhile conversation. Now it's time to put words into action. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye. And applause. Theo Forster is very well known, I'm sure, to all of you. He's going to facilitate the conversation further. Question and answer for the next 20 minutes or so, Theo.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
Bruce, the truth. The truth with Bruce, yes.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you, everybody. We have about 20 minutes for questions.
So, my name is Paul Ziller. I'm an economist in workload and land reform. I want to put something that might be considered provocative. The panelists, yourself, Gloria, have highlighted just a few of the numerous success stories that abound across every sector of South Africa around partnership-based land reform. There is no shortage of what works. In the face of that, we have continuing policy by government, which is kind of designed for failure. You couldn't design it more. Class, proactive land acquisition strategy where the government owns the land and lets it out. So this gives rise to, for me, one question: what is the real agenda behind government's approach to land reform? I don't want you to answer that. What I want to ask, though, in the face of all this continuing failure and unwillingness, actually, for government to get into scaling up what works, and it's not very expensive, you're still, the private sector, in all its manifestations, still having ongoing dialogue, discussions, coming up with good ideas. They're lying on the table for more than 2 years. Is it not time for the private sector to become a little bit more robust, conditional, and may I say it, less appeasing of government in relation to land reform?
Good question.
I think let's just, John, I'm going to pass this ball to you because I do think that where you are right is, I also am aware, and I think the Land Bank has played a big role in the various discussions, that there are specific models that are working. And I know some people sitting here is involved in those models. So I think the question is there are models, and perhaps John can take it further, because in terms of both the Land Bank discussions as well as agri-biz discussions, there is models that are working. And I think the question relies around, shouldn't we focus and be more aggressive on those models?
No, it's not my question. Should the private sector not be being a lot more robust and engaging and less appeasing, actually,
Towards government.
towards government around policy? Because the models exist. They've been shared and explained, and they're working and they're scalable. And so, is it not time, not just in the agriculture sector, perhaps, but for the private sector to a bit more pushback?
John?
Yeah, Paul, hi. I think it's a very good question, and in our negotiations, it's been tough on land reform, and it's you always want to negotiate on the basis that the next day you can still speak to the guy, and to a certain degree, we have been trying to find common ground as much as possible. That's why we've also come with own initiatives. I think we sit at a situation now where we have some really difficult bills, highly contested bills, like the Regulation of Agricultural Landholdings Bill, and the comments on that have to be in this week, Wednesday, tomorrow, 17th. And certainly, and this is the land ceilings, foreign land ownership, land commission bill. Certainly, there are issues that we cannot agree with strongly. In fact, we believe that the whole bill should be scrapped, to put it bluntly. So those comments are going in like that. We're doing it on our own. We're also doing it through Business Unity South Africa. We have worked with the Banking Association. We've worked with Agri-SA on that. But there's also the regulations on the value for the valuation of property, which are some issues. They're not all are going to be contested. And then the same with the reopening of the Restitution Amendment Bill, which is a private bill instituted at Parliament now, and those comments also have to be in this week. So I think we are taking a bit of a harder line, because what's happening now, the debate has actually taken on a different dimension because of the rhetoric that Bruce alluded to in terms of expropriation or restitution without compensation. Once you get into that sort of domain, certainly you're going to have to draw some lines, otherwise the whole system will collapse. And that is what Mpumelelo was saying. We can imagine what the problem will be if we go into that space. And then you've got to say up to there and no. And I think we're pretty much at that point now.
Just to add to what John was saying, what we have is the CEO's initiative in our country at the moment, as well.
They're nearly falling apart.
They are and they aren't. Yeah. I think what they're doing is that they digging their heels in the ground where they don't like what they're seeing, and if they're wanting to take our country forward as a group, and they will achieve that if government are prepared to come with them. If they're not prepared to come with them, then they're not going to go there. But I think they are pushing hard, and they are pushing back, Paul, as you are suggesting they should be doing just now.
But I can certainly say in that CEO forum, and remember the press, the media was excluded from that session last year. 150 of the biggest businessmen were in that session. There was blood. The president was told in no uncertain terms by big business. So that hard stance in a closed room is taken.
Gordon anyway. And that's the trouble. You can tell the president what you like, but his agenda is different to yours.
Well, that doesn't distract from you saying the right things. So I cannot every time try and compensate for what the reaction is. I must keep doing the right thing. And that is what's done there, of course. And that's to the point that John is making. Once you're in public, in the open space, you don't do it there. It's just stupid. You must have some emotional intelligence to foster debate in that area. But behind closed doors, and I see Annette, shaking her head up and down, because she knows what happens behind closed doors. You saw what happened this morning. One of the sacked ministers spilled the beans. He came out and said what happened.
For those of you who haven't seen, Motlodi, former mines minister, basically said that Brian Molefe had been putting a huge amount of pressure on him in order to get Eskom deals facilitated and to act on behalf of the Guptas. He refused. He got fired, and Mosebenzi Zwane was put into his job, and that's why Ramatlodi got fired. So the wheels are coming off quite spectacularly as there is greater pushback against state capture.
Point is, the truth comes out. What can we do? Should we compensate for those guys that's not doing right? No, we should stick to our guns and do the right thing.
You are speaking to Mama Bolora Peso. I'm just worried and have a sense of being betrayed by business. Because actually business, if you want to make any policy viable, business must take the lead. And I find that, in fact, since the new government came in, business surrendered its responsibility to the government and make friends with the government where it cannot get out. We, as farmers, for instance, would like to see business coming out in support of the emerging farmers, black farmers. If business can come out, whatever rhetoric that is radical, ultra-left radical, is in process, it may not function. But I think we are all waiting for our downfall. Because I mean, Mugabe himself never sponsored the land expropriation. It started elsewhere, and Mugabe had to surrender. It was started by Hunzi and the war veterans. They were the people who started running the whole thing, and Mugabe bought into it because he was also in crisis. It was not Mugabe himself. And the same will apply in this country at some stage. There will be something like that. But if business can play its ball and move business distributively, then the country will be saved and create more jobs, so that we shouldn't have thugs who play in the name of service delivery when they are actually unemployed. So we are faced with a problem that you need to look at ourselves as well as business, whether you play the role or not. So forget about the government. For now, let the government chase you and not be chase the government, because almost there is nothing that is the government today. I mean, it's only crime that is on. There's no government, there's no poor, good governance that is happening in the community. But business must continue, so that there shouldn't be rupture in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody would like to comment on that?
So no, we agree with that. It's exactly the point we're making. We're absolutely agreeing with that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
John Steenhuisen from the DA is being very quiet. He might want to make a point as well.
Thank you. My name is Mtutuzi Nkambula. I work for Agwanza Agricultural Finance in Mpumalanga. We finance land reform, we finance mainly land reform clients and everything. I would like to say big business has done a lot. However, there is still so much that can be done. I would like to go back to Bruce's example on that farm in the Western Cape, where the farmer said, I want to include my people in there. Then thereafter tend to say, no, rather let me just get something else. It goes back to pre-1994. It's them and us. The space is for everybody to share in. Then we all could move further together. Pre-1994, big business and everybody, especially during apartheid, they were willing to give because they had so much to lose. It is not about just a tenure of that comes with land ownership. If you looked at where they went, all these farmers, maybe 30% are in Mozambique. In Mozambique, you do not own land. So it's not about tenure, but it is about your comfort. You can I get away with it or not? So go back to just the last speaker to say, let us as big business move towards the center so that somebody somewhere will move towards us and meet us somewhere. Otherwise, we will be sitting with this problem.
Anybody would like to comment on that?
The sector uncertainty, when we have all these radical, ill-thought-out pieces of legislation, which is resulting in your agricultural community not investing into their properties, and we've already seen that trend where profitability levels are up but investment levels are dropping. So we need an element of policy certainty where we create an enabled environment, and I do think business needs to then play the lead role. But we would like to push forward on a high-level partnership basis to achieve that.
My name is Mokoka. I'm a farmer. Some 12 years ago. What I want to express is that business must come and lead. Government, sometimes they try their best, but if business is not in the leading, we are going to fail. Currently, we are on programs of the government, like Plus. We need land to be transferred. We cannot improve our farms. We are producing, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to thank Senves for their support all along. We've been battling, we get loans, we repay them over 6 months, but we cannot expand because of the issue of the land. We don't have title. Government is boosting around and saying we have given Africans land. We are still operating on lease issues, and that lease diminish our growth, because currently the climatic condition that has changed, we want to put spill points in our land for production. But security-wise, nobody wants to take it up. And we've got capacity, we can produce, we have proven that. So business, the banks also must also come into the picture. Design products that are very easy to access and that could accelerate development. Issues of insurances also. We need to create the contingency fund. We can't keep on paying premiums year on. We are paying over 200,000 rand a year upfront. And how many times do you get disaster? So government also needs to put aside some contingency fund that will every year increase. And it's not only, disaster comes once. We have just suffered disaster in February. Millions was doodgeslaan.
We're one of the few countries where that is not the case.
No, it's true, and we need to change our mindset. The issue of land does not grow. We need to preserve our land. The LKR mono cultivation. We need to change and get the new systems like no-till conservation agriculture.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Anybody want to comment here?
So that's a businessman speaking.
Yeah, I want to support government. I want to support government here. The insurance companies have been working for the last 18 months with National Treasury. It'll probably be with us before the end of this year. They're ready to pilot at this stage.
The one point that comes out of this, if radical economic transformation means to transfer title deeds, I think we will all agree with that.
Theo, thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, taking time out of the day. I know you'd rather be driving tractors and flying aeroplanes and all sorts of things like that. Jeff would rather be counting mealies in the silos, exactly, and counting his money. My thanks to Francois Stradon from Senvest, to Pierre Venter from the Banking Association, to John Purchase from Agbiz, and also to Mpumulelo Mkabela for coming through for us today as well. And thank you very much for your time and for sharing this last hour and 20 minutes with us. Thanks very much.
Nation in Conversation, proudly brought to you by AFGRI, Monsanto, Nedbank, Senvest, Engine, Grain SA, and John Deere.